to all of you, and thank you for joining me today for the first in the series of seminars entitled Building Policy Consensus on the World Stage, The Pitfalls, Progress, and Possibilities. I thank the Sine Institute for Policy and Politics for their confidence and for providing me with this opportunity to share with you my experiences, my values, and my deeply held beliefs in public service and equal opportunities for all. We are all concerned by what we see across the globe today. The multilateral world order challenged, erosion of values, deeply polarized societies represented by uneasy coalitions and divided governments. Factions unable to come together to make important policy decisions for its citizens. As societies turn inwards and we see a rise in nationalism, populism, parochialism, and extremism, as well as ever more aggressive policies of confrontation rather than cooperation, we find ourselves at an important inflection point. In this seminar series, we will explore the need to find common ground overseas and at home to build stronger alliances, resilient societies, and stronger citizenry by exploring topics such as the future of diplomacy and multilateralism, the future of the transatlantic alliance, the challenges of building social consensus, and the need for social innovation. Together with my guest speakers, I hope to encourage participation of particularly the young generation in government and public service, in spite of the declining trust in public institutions around the world. I hope to encourage you to pursue your own dreams, goals, and aspirations, as well as to pursue working towards making it possible for others to do so. So to say, to pay it forward, not only through your positional power and influence, but also through social engagement, advocacy, and activism. Today's seminar will center on what I believe is the starting point for any of us, how our upbringing, our own life experiences, successes, and failures, keeping an open mind and dealing with prejudice, not only that of others, but also our own, shape our perspectives and leadership styles. What people remember most are real life stories. For this reason, to illustrate my points today, I will be drawing heavily on my own personal experiences and how they translated into my beliefs, values, and leadership styles. It is often said that a picture speaks 1,000 words, and therefore to introduce our topic today and to provoke perhaps a few smiles out there, I have prepared 2 sets of photos to illustrate and help you visualize the road that I will travel with you today. We will travel together from the rural roads of my native Grobnik in the suburbs of Rijeka, Croatia, and look at my upbringing and early life experiences that shaped me. And please know that this is the first time I publicly share some of these photos, which many would probably choose not to do so for reasons of public perception. But as I will touch upon later, some aspects of where I come from were a greater source of prejudice with which I have been confronted in my life than those related to my gender, as most people would assume. However, as you can see, I was never afraid to take the bull by the horns. My journey leads to political and diplomatic corridors and centers of national and international power, which continue to shape my perspectives. Keeping an open mind and being open to change is one of the prerequisites of success and personal growth. We change and develop as circumstances change. Experiences shape us. Our priorities shift, and we need to be able to adjust them to the changing landscape around us. With time, our power and influence become personal and positional. It was always an honor to visit countries around the world, meet with their leaders, and in particular, meet with people to whom I am most grateful for the warm welcome with which I was always received in every corner of the world. It was a particular honor to speak at the UN and to work actively in support of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I will be speaking of my most important experiences that helped me bridge from one point to another. So today's webinar will obviously be a bit more personal and human-centered. We also have two wonderful guest speakers today who will add more substance to the framework of our discussion and provide some of their own advice. Dr. Robin Harris will speak of his friendship and formative experiences of an iconic political leader, Margaret Thatcher, who alongside with Winston Churchill remains one of the most remembered UK prime ministers. We're not here today to discuss her politics, but to learn from her formative experiences as a trailblazer, one of the first elected female prime ministers from a different generation who lived and worked under different circumstances. And Tanya, one of the new generation of leaders, will speak of her own remarkable path to success in the business world. Another reason that prompted me to speak about Margaret Thatcher today was her speech delivered in Zagreb in 1998, which is so pertinent to our discussion today. And I quote, "The prospect of becoming an honorary citizen of Zagreb caused me to reflect on what may at first seem an odd question for a former British, and indeed very British, prime minister. What if I were a citizen of Zagreb and Croatia by birth? What if I had grown up here? Would I have believed the same things? In what sense would I have been the same person?" She goes on to reflect on some aspects of our recent history, concluding that how she might have reacted to that history is a hugely hypothetical question. But the exercise is by no means fruitless, she goes on. For in spite of the enormously different circumstances of the Margaret Thatcher I am and the Margaret Thatcher or some equivalent that I might have been, it is possible to see that both I and my Croatian alter ego would have needed the same things. End of quote. I don't think that there could be a better illustration of the point I want to make today. We all come from somewhere. Our environments and our experiences define our most deeply held values, our attitudes, empathy, leadership styles. Those are character building moments. They shape our present, they provide us with a purpose and an inspiration for our future. There are many reasons why studying formative experiences and periods and learning from them in a thoughtful, strategic manner is important. I will single out three that I find most relevant for this webinar. First, studying your own early experiences is important for your own personal development. They provide you with an opportunity to recognize, use, understand, and manage your own emotions and motivations. By understanding your motivations, both extrinsic, such as your status or salary, and intrinsic, such as personal growth and development, or perhaps proving yourself to others, as well as your desires, moods, fears, capacities, and limitations, you can manage your expectations. You can understand and prioritize which life goals are important and how to achieve them. Based on that, you can set out your vision and devise your strategy. And if you do not like where you're going, you can always change your course. Secondly, understanding other people's experiences will help you in managing and improving your relationships with others, whether they be your colleagues, your team, your subordinates, or your superiors. It will help you understand other people emphatically, to understand other people's emotions, wants, needs, and motivations, to be able to respond to them and to consequently work effectively with others or manage conflict situations. Thirdly, understanding formative experiences is by all means consequential for geopolitical and geostrategic considerations, studies, risk assessment, and policy formulation. Formative experiences are often ignored, underestimated factors in geopolitical studies. However, whether responding to crisis, building alliances, or setting out your national defense strategies and positioning yourself in the world, you have to look at these aspects too. What defines your competitor, opponent, or adversary, even your allies? Where do their values, visions, and strategies come from? What matters to them? What motivates them? To develop your own strategy, you have to know the other side. There are too many of my own formative experiences to recount here today, both accomplishments and disappointments. Therefore, I will focus on several clusters of influences and how they led me to develop my perspectives and/or my politics and policies. First, my parents. When I think back to who has had the greatest impact on my life, it always comes down to my parents, people of humble background who barely managed to finish elementary school because they had to work from an early age, but whose wisdom and life experience are astonishing. They taught me the value of hard work, excellence, ambition, modesty, honesty, integrity, respect, and treating others in the same way that I expect them to treat me. I do not remember my parents ever making an ugly comment about anyone else, regardless of their background. During the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they took in Bosniak Muslim refugees to give them temporary housing, work, a paycheck, and a seat at our dinner table. My parents left the biggest imprint in my life, and I am deeply grateful to them for all their sacrifices and all their wisdom. Secondly, sense of equality and gender. Proving myself to my father, who had wanted a son, that I was of equal value, combined with the fact that all my neighbors were boys with whom I played all sorts of games. All that has instilled in me a strong sense of self-confidence and of equality. Admittedly, there were moments when I come home in the evening all covered up in mud, and my mom would tell me slightly, you're a girl, you should be more responsible. And I would respond spitefully, no, I'm not. But that you should be more responsible part somehow did stick with me. And unfortunately, I would learn later in life that yes, indeed, women still have to work harder to prove that they're equally competent as men. And that yes, we're still looked at through a different pair of lenses that seem to distort vision by sharpening the physical features and blurring the professional capacities. I never felt in any way inferior to men and never ever doubted, or as a matter of fact, never even thought about the fact that I am a woman and that thus I should be treated in a different way. However, I have always felt a moral obligation that a sort of trailblazer myself, having navigated so many glass labyrinths and pushed up so many glass ceilings, I had a duty to use my personal and positional power to pursue and promote gender equality. It has always been both a major policy component of any position I held, although women have to tread carefully that line in order not to be perceived as aggressively pursuing a self-serving principle. And it has always been a matter of activism and advocacy for me. There is statistical evidence that gender parity brings about greater development opportunities for both developed and underdeveloped countries. Gender parity is particularly important in areas ridden by conflict. There is much more of a chance for the peace process to succeed if women are involved. Translating this into concrete policy action, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, I brought women from Afghanistan and Iraq for visits to Croatia to exchange experience with women in both the public and the NGO sector, who had actively participated in our own reconciliation process. While working at NATO, gender was a big component of what I did. On my many visits to Afghanistan, I always made sure to include local women, from those in position of relative power to those working individually. Through virtual Silk Road Afghanistan program, we were introducing broadband internet that provided opportunities for women to pursue education and work online. Economic empowerment of women had a true snowball effect. I also fought hard for and would not give up until NATO created a special position of gender advisor in the rank of a general officer with the ISAF command. Thirdly, education, education, education. My mother did not want me to have the same kind of hard life that she had. She realized that the way out for me, the opportunity that she never had herself, was to pursue an education. Education was my ticket into both the physical, geographical world and the world of possibilities. It is the main reason for where I am today, and it is for that reason that I promote and encourage education and ambition in young generations. This is one of the reasons why, as president, I strongly supported reform of education and developed a program called Croatia Reads at Croatian schools to encourage the habit of lifelong reading. The connective tissue of the two slides, the two sets of photos that I showed you in the beginning, the bridge from one to the other, has always been education. And this is one of the main points that I want to make today. Education is the single most important development tool for any individual, community, nation, and for the global community. It is also a most powerful weapon against inequality, prejudice, hate, and extremism of any kind. Fourthly, prejudice. I have encountered a lot of prejudice in my life, in particular in my early life, mostly related to the rural area where I come from. It still happens today, even from those who consider themselves intellectually superior or opinion makers. Did it sting at first? Of course it did. However, I was self-confident enough to realize not to care. I knew what I wanted, to travel the world. I knew what I had to do, study and work hard. And I was determined to show everyone I could to do, that I could do what I set out to do. I just did not know at the time that the realization of that dream would go far beyond my wildest imagination. As I said, there was a lot of gender prejudice as well. And by the way, those bikini photos that you can find of me online, I'm sorry to say so, but not mine. That is just another way how some will try to reduce you to a frivolous, inconsequential, unimportant object. Shortly before my first election, somebody came up with a so-called Plan Barbie, deliberately structured to frame the discussion and re-feminize a presidential candidate who was coming from NATO and was thus perceived as having made it in this typically male domain as NATO is still perceived. It takes patience and perseverance to endure, and support from others does help. For those of you who find yourselves insulted based on whatever of your personal traits somebody finds different, by all means, do pursue your efforts aimed at equality for all, but do not let them discourage you. And do not engage in unproductive fights. Just put them on ignore. That will discourage the most. However, we ourselves are not immune for harboring prejudice, and we have to learn to recognize it and deal with it. I will mention just two instances from my personal experience. First, when I traveled to the US as an exchange student back in 1985, I was afraid how I would be received by my peers as someone coming from a different system and regime. However, soon after I arrived, I realized that I had been the prejudiced one. My peers did not treat me based on where I came from and what my background was, but based on my personality, work ethics, and the way that I treated them. The second instance was when during the war against Croatia, I was sitting in bomb cellars during JNA attacks on Zagreb and listening to the news from the city of Vukovar, which was under heavy siege and was later completely destroyed with many people killed or taken into concentration camps. The war put many things into perspective and had a profound effect on me, including my decision to definitely remain in Croatia and help rebuild it as a democracy. But I particularly remember myself thinking that there would be eons before we could live together alongside our Serbian neighbors again. Fortunately, I was wrong. The reconciliation happened much sooner, and it was possible because rather than keep living or reliving the past, we focused on the future. This was later the basis of one of the main leitmotifs of my presidency, zajedništvo, a word in Croatian, a concept which is difficult to translate into English. It is not as much unity as it is the concept of community, communal interest, to bridge the ideological divide and work together for the benefit of the common future. Our political affiliations may vary, but we share common interests and the duty to fulfill them. This concept is particularly relevant for the US today as you face the consequences of not only the events of January the 6th, but the deeply embedded long-term inequalities and work towards a more perfect union. 5, those who lead or are supposed to. And then there are people who are supposed to lead us, but end up disappointing us. Your leaders and managers. I will always have the highest respect for the good and the kind leaders and managers that I have worked with. But I probably learned most from the bad ones, or one. I saw how confusing, demoralizing such an experience can be and how much potential was lost. And I knew exactly what I did not want. 6, politics. My own political engagement came as a result of adversity and being unhappy with the political circumstances in Croatia. If you're not happy with the situation you live in, do something about it. Start changing it, one step at a time. When I was elected president, keeping my promise to be with the people, to be the voice of the people was important. A lot of it was labeled as populism by the media, although there is a huge difference between populism in approach, that is being with the people, and populism in substance, which means manipulating with the base emotions of the population to ensure personal political gain. In addition to the usual frustration that politicians, especially female politicians, face, such as misogynism, sensationalism, fake news, trolls, misinterpretation, and being taken out of context, I also faced the frustration with my positional power, or rather with the lack of executive power and the limitations I had in contrast to huge expectations from the public. There are so many other aspects that I could talk about, such as religion, culture, history, travel, etc. Let us move on to our guest speakers, and then in my final remarks at the end of this webinar, I will make some points that I would like for you to take away from today's seminar as perhaps lessons learned from some other of us. I am now pleased to be joined by Dr. Robin Harris, whose expertise in the politics and the life of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is unmatched. In the early stages of his professional career, Dr. Harris was entrenched in governance, having served as a member of the Conservative Research Department in 1978, of which he later became director. In the years to follow, he would serve as a special advisor to Her Majesty's Treasury, then to the Home Office, and finally to the Downstream Policy Unit under Prime Minister Thatcher. From this point, Dr. Harris developed a strong relationship with Prime Minister Thatcher, which continued even after her departure from government. As one of her most trusted speechwriters and advisors, Dr. Harris gained a unique insight into the Prime Minister, one that goes beyond her objectives as a politician and delves into her personality. More recently, Dr. Harris used his unique window into the life of Prime Minister Thatcher to write Not Returning: The Complete Life of Margaret Thatcher, which has been hailed by the Daily Mail as the political biography of the decade. It provides a candid insight into Margaret Thatcher's personality, ideas, and achievements, heavily based on personal experience. We are grateful for Dr. Harris's participation in today's webinar and are excited to learn more about his perspective. Dr. Harris, dear Robin, you write in your book that more perhaps than any other British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher was made what she was by her upbringing, and she knew it. She never forgot her origins or early life. Even the oldest scars remained painfully sensitive. The fact remains that to understand Margaret Thatcher, it is first necessary to grasp the nature of Margaret Roberts. Can you please elaborate?
I shall indeed, and thank you very much for inviting me onto this fine event. Well, as you say, I did know her over a long period of time, and I became convinced that it was her origins which made the woman. She was born in Grantham, which is a medium-sized industrial town, quite a boring one really, in the east of England, northeast of England. She was born to a very modest family. Her father was a self-made man. Her mother also, she earned her money as a seamstress. Margaret Roberts was born over the shop, she used to say. And she used to say that she liked living over the shop as she did in Downing Street. The shop was a grocer's shop. And she spent her early years as a child working in that shop, helping her father with the deliveries and so on. And she learned an enormous amount from her father. She was her father's favorite, there's no doubt about that. And you mentioned, I think, this question about whether perhaps father would have liked a son rather than a daughter. This was one of those questions we never quite know, but I suspect that he perhaps was expecting a son because he very much treated her in that context as somebody who was not just going to stay at home, somebody who was going to have a professional life and indeed a public life. For example, every week they would take what she used to call a serious book out of the library, and my goodness me, the titles she told me about, they were serious books, and they would read that, and they went to what were called extension lectures of Nottingham University, which again were taxing from politicians, professionals, and so on. So there was that side. And then there was the religious side. It was a very strong Methodist family, and her father was quite an inspiring lay preacher. And I think that she picked up, as I'll explain, certain traits from that. And then what else? Well, I think also Grantham was small enough to be a community. It wasn't poor, it wasn't rich. It was a community in which people tried and worked hard, and in which they helped each other discreetly when things had to be done. They didn't look to the state, they looked to each other. They looked to their own families. Now you can see, I think, from all that, that's the kind of values that she inherited. And I would say that her economics, which obviously was free market capitalist economics, was not based really on Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek, though she appreciated their contributions. It was based on her father's business. And also this extraordinary fervor which she had when she spoke, and which many men found extremely disturbing, particularly rather sort of mild-mannered Tories of the upper class, but extremely disturbing. And she got this preachy manner, I mean, this fervent manner, I would say, from listening to those sermons. And she used to have an expression, she said, if you've got a message, preach it. And she preached it. And the other thing that I would say is that when at the last period when she was living at home at Grantham, and then when she was at Oxford, it was during the Second World War. And this was a period at which I think this very, very strong patriotism that she had emerged, particularly admiration for Winston Churchill and for the British war effort. Finally, I would say this, that Grantham made her, but she did not intend to just stay in Grantham. She used the values and insights and training that she got from Grantham to go out into the world, and she didn't often go back. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Another question, did she see her work as a deeply personal endeavor, and did she act from passion and according to her values, or did she act based on informed decision and choices on rationality, or was it a combination of different aspects?
Well, it was, of course, a combination, because if one just reacted, particularly if you start off in any profession, not least politics, if you just start by relying on your own impulses and feelings, you will make an awful fool of yourself in quite a short time. So obviously she didn't just do that, but the difference that I think you're driving at was there. And how much this is a difference, which is a female difference, and how much it's just a matter of Margaret Thatcher, I don't know. You'll have insights that I don't have. But I'd say this, she was instinctive in her politics, and she had, and she used this expression, she had beliefs. Now, this idea of this belief, obviously it's not a religious belief. She did have religious beliefs, but I'm not talking about that. It was something more than just a philosophical principle. She believed that certain things, certain truths, policy truths, political truths, were based on human nature and that they were in absolute sense right. And this was a matter of head and heart. And I think that that was something which meant that she spoke in different terms to most other politicians of her day. And the other thing I would say is this. I'm well aware, as a man and as somebody who dealt with her quite a lot, that I feel it necessary before I express my opinion to say, well, on the one hand this, and on the other hand that, and there may be something to be said for this, and there may be something to be said for that, but actually in the end, I think this. Now this, of course, is just a mask. This is just a pretense. I know exactly what I think before I say it, and so do most people, but she couldn't be bothered to go through this palaver. She just said what she thought, and then she expected people to disagree with it or to qualify it and so on. Now that really was quite different. So that again, I think, is partly an answer to what you said. And of course, it was very disorientating to people, some of whom would just think they had to say yes or no, but they weren't meant to say yes or no, they were meant to argue.
And what qualities would you say made her an outstanding leader in a crisis?
Well, she was an outstanding leader, and there's no doubt about that. She was outstanding during the Falklands War. She was outstanding during a very violent miners' strike, which was really a sort of insurrection. She was outstanding in forcing through her policies, particularly in the first 2 or 3 years on the economy, which were very, very strongly opposed. And so what made this? Well, I think the main thing that made it was courage. Courage. Now, Aristotle says somewhere, and the fact that he says it doesn't mean that it's right, but anyway, it's interesting. He says that a woman's courage is different from a man's courage. Well, I don't know. But she had both physical courage and moral courage. Now, moral courage we can all understand. Moral courage means that you have got to have the inner strength and conviction to do the right thing, even when other people don't like it and they're going to oppose it. And you've got to do that. That's moral courage. But you had physical courage as well. Now, I'll just mention this because it does relate, I think, to this question of femininity. And as an example of this, in October 1984, the IRA blew up the Brighton, the Grand Hotel in Brighton. They missed me because I actually left early in the afternoon. Otherwise, whether I would be speaking to you, I don't know. Probably I would. Anyway, but anyway, I'm glad I left. But she didn't leave. And of course, quite a few people were killed during this. It was a very unpleasant experience. And her private secretary, who was working on her speech, she never stopped writing speeches. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Dennis had gone to bed, of course. So there was a crash, there was falling masonry, and the lights flickered, but some lights stayed on. And I remember Robin Butler, who was the civil servant, saying to me that this woman, she just got up and she went straight into this room with the falling masonry to see that her husband was all right. She didn't blink an eyelid. That's courage. So I think that you need courage in these crises more than anything else, moral courage and physical courage too sometimes.
And what was her attitude towards her public image? Was it important to her, and to what degree? How did she personally cope with the negative press and the protest movements at the time?
Well, she was a pretty woman, and she liked to look pretty, and she had she wanted to look good. But beyond that, I don't think she was very interested in her, her appearance professionally and that sort of thing. She wanted to look good because it made her feel good, I think. But she had advisors who told her, don't wear this, do wear that, do this and have a, don't wear too much dark or don't wear too much light or whatever. You're the expert on this, Kolinda, I'm not. I'm telling you, she got some advice and she took notice of her. But generally speaking, you put your finger on this point. She did not read the newspapers. She didn't read the newspapers, and she didn't listen to the news. Every day, her press secretary, at the end of the day, would draw up a list of the key points for her, summarized, for her to know about the following morning, and she discussed them with him. And this was a good idea, because her successor, I can tell you why it's a good idea, her successor, and this is proof that men are just, actually in many cases, more sensitive than women, very thin-skinned, still not political men. That her successor, John Major, would read all this stuff and go absolutely berserk and spend most of the next day ringing up editors and journalists complaining. It was very undignified and didn't get anywhere. So I think that by using that method, she kept herself focused on what she had to do.
Wonderful. And a related question to that is, we still face a lot of misogynism today, as I spoke about in my opening remarks. But I would assume that in those times she had to face it to even a much higher degree in more express and direct ways than we do today, including in her closest Tory circles. What effect did it have on her, and how did she deal with it, and how did she respond to it?
Well, this is a very important question, and I'm going to dissent a little from the presupposition. Misogyny means hatred of women. Now, I don't believe that anybody who hated Mrs. Thatcher hated her because she was a woman. They hated her because of her policies, things she said, things she did. They thought she was trying to destroy the country or create inequality or goodness knows what. But they hated her for those reasons. And also they hated her because I'm very fond of her, but she behaved very badly sometimes. I mean, she was very, very rude to people. She lost her temper with them, she shouted at them, and I'm afraid she humiliated them. That just happened. And in front of other people, because she was under tension. Anyway, she shouldn't have done it. And with men, if they are humiliated by a woman, it is much, generally, I think, more serious than if they're humiliated by a man. And there are some men, I would say, who cannot tolerate anyway taking orders from a woman, probably more in those days. But the other side of this is she benefited in many ways from being a woman because, okay, it was tokenism, but she actually got her first job as a minister because a woman had to be there to do it because they didn't have any other woman. And secondly, she got into the shadow cabinet and then the cabinet because she was a woman. And there's a story I must tell you about this. Her predecessor, Ted Heath, dreadful man, really. Anyway, there we are, I must be neutral. But she went on to defeat him as leader of the party. So obviously his warmth towards her did not increase as a result of that. But anyway, he hated her from the start. And on the cabinet table, he would arrange it so that she was at the far end, out of his vision, partly because he couldn't stand the sight of her, but partly also because she kept on raising her hand up and wanting to say something. So he was told, though, by somebody one day, and this is before he allowed her in. He said, "We've got to have a woman, we've got to have a woman. I don't know who we're going to have." And so somebody would say, "Well, Margaret Thatcher, she's far more able than anybody else." And there was a silence. He said, "Yeah, well," so the chief whip says to me, he says, "She is good, but if we get her in, we'll never get her out." In fact, she got Ted Heath out. That's my answer to that.
Yes. Well, I have two co-producers of the seminar today, Jack and Reed, and Jack has a question for you. So Jack, can you please come in?
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Harris. Okay, so what advice do you think Mrs. Thatcher would give young people, and in particular women, who strive to make a career in either business, politics, or any sector today?
I think she would say, work, work, and after that, if there was any doubt, she'd add work, because actually, that is how she succeeded. She succeeded by knowing more about all the things you have to know than anybody else. I can give you an example of that. and that was that she would always try and know more even than the relevant department minister knew about his or her, well, his subject, because it was never her, his subject. So I think she would say, work, believe in yourself, and be determined, and believe you can do it. Believe you can do it. There is an associated problem with this, and Kolinda knows this, that the question for a woman is a bit different, because if a woman wishes to get married and bring up a family and have children, that I think is the really difficult thing for the woman, the very difficult thing. How you balance being a good mother with being a successful politician. And I wouldn't say that Mrs. Thatcher had any answer for that. She just knew it was a big problem. I mean, that there are sacrifices, and the sacrifices are also to some extent made by the children, let's be honest about it. And she was able to be a successful politician from quite a young age, even with twins, because she could afford to have a full-time nanny. And of course, most people in those days could not, hardly anybody could. Now there's more childcare and so on. But that, I think, is probably one of the most difficult things. And I will add my 2 pence of this, despite not being a mother, a woman, or having any children. I would say that this is a more general theme, that perhaps people, not just women, but men too, should be willing to and urged to go, many of them, into politics a bit later, when they've actually perhaps had children, brought them up, and also have got some experience of the world. But that's just my 2 pence.
Thank you. And quickly, if you can, what advice do you think that Margaret Thatcher would give to President Joe Biden today, both with respect to the domestic situation, the healing process, and in the international arena today? Well,
Mrs. Thatcher was never a healer. I can just tell you that. She was a very divisive person. But actually, all serious leadership is divisive. And it's divisive for this reason, that if you're going to get into power and you want to change things, and this is true on the left or the right, you're going to find people who don't agree with you. Now, that doesn't mean they will hate you necessarily, but it's very difficult to make changes without annoying people. So I think myself that healing, first of all, is a matter of time. And secondly, I don't think politicians are really there to heal. I think it's better for preachers and pastors and whatever it is to heal. But that's just a personal opinion. I don't think she would claim anyway that she was there to heal. On the second point, she would feel that she had something to say, and this international point. And President Biden has this great problem of China to deal with. Now, Mrs. Thatcher took a very close interest in China. She dealt with the Chinese leaders, Deng Xiaoping, Li Peng, who was hardline. She was very fully briefed about these people, massive intelligence briefing and so on. And she knew exactly what they were like because she had to deal with them over Hong Kong. Now, they are very tough people. It's a very strong system, and they are potentially quite dangerous. But that doesn't mean that you don't engage with them. You do engage with them, but you ensure that they know that you are strong enough to cope with everything that they may press you for. But I think that that is going to be his big problem. And I hope that he and the people around him get it right. And I think that she would feel that too.
And last but not least, also very quickly, a question of personal interest to me. What did Mrs. Thatcher carry in those handbags she was so famous for? I always thought she was ready to use them as a cold weapon of some sort, if need be.
Well, they were big enough to knock somebody over the head, but she didn't actually do that to my knowledge. Also, she was quite short, so she wouldn't have been able to reach. But in that, now, I obviously never peered into that handbag. It was not exactly a very discreet thing to do. But when she opened the handbag, there was always a very strong smell of Chanel No. 5, which I think is a very nice perfume, actually. I don't know, maybe a bit old-fashioned, but I think it's very nice. It's strong perfume. And indeed, the papers that she used, she'd hand you papers. They didn't just have scribbles, they had a strong smell of Chanel No. 5. So I think there was some of that in there. The second thing she had in there was a small book of quotations from Winston Churchill. And she took those around with her for inspiration, but she never quoted Churchill. She never quoted Churchill because she thought that people would think she was trying to be like Churchill. And she never thought she was a patch on Churchill. So they were only there for inspiration. It's quite odd. And the third thing she had in them sometimes was notes produced by awkward people like me in another policy unit, which would give her a separate set of advice about matters which are going to be discussed at a ministerial meeting, other than the briefing that would have come through the civil service. And this filled the relevant ministers with terror, because of course she would come out with knowledge of something and some insight that they were completely unprepared for. That was indeed a lethal weapon.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Harris, for your participation in our webinar today. And thank you for the wonderful insights into Margaret Thatcher's life and personal experiences. And with that, I am delighted to introduce our next guest speaker. Please join me in welcoming Tanya Golesic, president of the iconic brand Jimmy Choo. Since taking over in 2016 as president of the Americas, Tanya has been vital in expanding Jimmy Choo to a full luxury lifestyle omni-channel brand. Prior to her time at Jimmy Choo, she served as the global CCO of Canada Goose, where she expertly developed the brand into a top-performing global luxury player. Before joining Canada Goose, Tanya served as Senior Vice President of Marc Jacobs International and as Senior Vice President of Sales and Planning for both the Jones Group and Ralph Lauren. In just a few weeks, Tanya will be transitioning into a new role as President of the Women's Division at Michael Kors. A young Canadian Croatian, Tanya's trailblazing parallels Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's. With their generational differences, Tanya's insights will provide us with a modern example of women in leadership and early experience shaping our perspectives. We're thankful for Tanya's participation and are looking forward to speaking with her. So Tanya, how have your life experiences defined and shaped you? Are they important to you?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Dr. Harris. I feel like I'm going to repeat so much of what you've said and what Dr. Harris has said, which then leads me to believe that the key to a successful career are so many of the values that we've already touched upon. So thank you again, Kolinda, for having me. And to answer your question, I give all credit to my parents. My parents, not dissimilar to yours, just a different situation. My parents grew up in former Yugoslavia and Croatia. And at the time that they were there, obviously they were in their 20s, and it was communism at the time, so there was not a democracy as what we have today in Croatia. And at that time, my parents knew that if they didn't join the Communist Party to be successful, then they would have to leave and start a life on their own where they could find somewhere to be successful. So in the 1970s, they were given two choices. One choice was to go to Australia. The other choice was to go to Canada. And I guess my parents' love of the deep freeze cold took them to Canada, but they also, unfortunately or fortunately, but they also had family there. So my parents, left Croatia. They didn't speak a word of English, and they left for Canada. And when I think about that today, and I think about how difficult, and you see what's happening in the world today, and for people who are leaving their countries and leaving their families and leaving all of the comforts of everything that they knew, to be brave enough and to be, Dr. Harris said that Margaret Thatcher was brave, or she had courage. And I use a similar word, which is probably interchangeable, which is fearlessness. You have to be fearless if you think about getting up and moving to another country where you don't speak the same language and just hoping, you can make it. So for me, my parents and doing that and instilling, that opportunity for myself. And so I was born in Canada. And Canada is a great country, a beautiful country, such a amazing country to grow up in. And at a pretty early age in my teenage years, I had a feeling that fashion was kind of going to be my path, because it was something that I was interested in. My mother owned 2 clothing stores at the time. But what I knew inside of me, which I believe was instilled in me, is that I knew if I wanted to work in fashion, I wanted to be the biggest, the best brands. And unfortunately, because Canada only has a population of, of California of 33 million people, I knew that I would have to move in order to do that, because we didn't have the vast, the global brands that you have in the US. So I knew my choices at that time were either going to New York, they were going to London, Milan, or Paris, right? Were the fashion capitals really of the world. And that's then where I think I had my courage and my fearlessness, because seeing what my parents had done and what they had accomplished, I thought to myself, okay, I need to get to New York. New York is where this is going to happen for me. So the good news is I spoke the same language because I spoke English. And I managed to get myself transferred to New York. And it's, that was 20 years ago. So I think if it wasn't for my parents and my family and the determination and understanding what fearlessness means, then I probably wouldn't have been brave enough to do that and get to where I am today.
Wonderful, Tanya. Thank you. I guess you've answered my question also. Who are the people who have helped you most in your life? I guess that would be your parents. Another co-producer of the program is Reed, and Reed has some questions for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Tanya. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
So my next question is, can you tell us a story, an anecdote about an unexpected experience that had a much greater impact on your life than you would have thought it would have had when it happened?
Yes, and it's a very recent experience, and it's called COVID. And for me, I think that is by far today, after looking back on what we've gone through for the past year, the biggest life-changing event that I've had to endure. The first year I moved to New York was the year of 9/11. So obviously that was a difficult event as well in terms of navigating and not knowing anyone here. But I think COVID has, for someone who works in fashion or someone who is part of a brand or that runs retail stores and has a huge retail business, just getting your head around the fact that one day someone is going to say, okay, all of your stores are going to be closed, and there's going to be no more sales. And you have teams of people who are amazing, who work in these stores. You have an e-commerce business, which is great, but the devastation around that was something like nothing I've ever experienced. In addition to being devastating, especially in the first couple of months when everything was just simply closed, the silver lining in COVID, which I look back now and have this conversation with so many people, the fact that we were given, at the end of the day, except for people obviously who've lost people and who've been ill, we've been given a gift in the business world, especially in the retail or fashion world, in that I think we were all marching along this path of almost destruction, right? We had too much of everything. We worked hard. We had, more product than we ever needed. We had, we didn't really have a life. We just kept on producing. And all of a sudden that was pulled away from us. And when the rug was pulled away, it really gave everyone the opportunity and the clarity, the people who are, I believe, that are successful, to sit back and say, okay, if this is what the future holds, right? How do we reimagine what our brand could be? What if we could just wipe away everything and we've been given, a clean slate? How would you reimagine a brand? How would you reimagine your stores? How would you reimagine the story that you're telling? And I think it really brought a lot of amazing opportunities to people who are super creative. It gave people to go back to where we used to be, where creativity actually was valued versus a commercial enterprise where creative people are forced just to design products. So I think for me, COVID and what it's taught me in the beginning, obviously it was extremely difficult with the furloughing and everything else that everyone went through. I think that it was a huge eye opener, and not only in the fashion business, in so many businesses, and has been a gift to be able to reset the world as we used to know it, and I think from now on, I think we're in such a strong position to come back, right? It's a time of growth, it's a time of healing. And I think COVID is definitely the biggest opportunity that I have seen in my lifetime.
I love that you're able to find some optimism in this crazy world we're living in right now. So my next question, moving into kind of your leadership style, trust is the basis of any human relationship. And so one of your tasks as a manager, as a leader in your field, is to gain the trust of your team. How do you manage to do that?
That's a great question. I think trust comes with time, first and foremost. I think there's two ways of building successful teams. And I think first and foremost, any good leader, I think, has a very, very high sense of EQ. I think people who are able to understand other people, to be empathetic. It's not just about IQ anymore. It's really understanding, there's so many nuances and so many different types of people that you meet throughout your career. And as you have more and more experience, surrounding yourself with super smart people is the key to any good leader's success. And if you can't do that, that usually means you have a confidence problem. And we've talked about, or low self-confidence. And we've talked, Kolinda mentioned that, and Dr. Harris mentioned it as well. And I think having the EQ to understand the type of people, that you need, having the IQ to understand the type of people who are smarter than you, that can be in roles where you may not be so smart. And then starting to build teams that way. And a lot of the time, instinct plays a huge role for me. I think I'm terrible at interviewing people because I don't necessarily, I can't just sit and ask questions that are, peripheral questions. I really need to understand what makes someone tick. And I need to know, once that happens, if that type of personality works with my personality. And then once that person is on your team, that's when trust happens, right? That's when you don't micromanage people, when you level set expectations, when you outline clear expectations for anyone. I think one of the most difficult things to do for someone who's working for you is not to outline expectations, because unless someone knows what their goals are, they'll never be successful. And if they're not successful, you're not successful. So I think trust evolves over that time period. And over the years, you understand the type of person that works well with you. And much of my career, the person actually who's about to take my job at Choo, she's worked with me for 10 years now. So I like to bring people along that journey with me. And there's a huge amount of trust that goes into that.
I'd like to add to that, just jump in very quickly. A lot of people perceive others as competition and try to sideline them. Unfortunately, it's especially, I find it happens among women. But actually, the biggest legacy that we leave behind us are the people whom we educate, whom we help grow and mold and succeed in life. So,
100%. Yep. So true.
That was very helpful.
Back to you.
So my next question will be is, how do you embrace change, and have your early experiences been helpful for you to do so?
Absolutely. I think for me, that was really easy. And the reason it was really easy is because I work in the fashion industry. So if you think about, and that's only really what I can talk intelligently to, meaning that the fashion industry, if you think about what it is, it's ever changing. It's every single month, there's a new delivery of new product, new handbags, new shoes, new ready to wear that hits the floor, which means it's ever changing. Nothing in fashion lives more than, 2 or 3 months. So the one thing that I love about the fashion industry is that it is ever changing. And that it's so fast paced. So I think it takes a certain type of personality. And I think it also takes someone with a certain level of, I guess I could go back to the word courage or fearlessness, in that you're constantly pivoting and changing. You could be changing strategy. If you think of it from a commercial standpoint, if you think about it from a creative standpoint, designers design collections based on inspiration, and maybe one day someone has inspiration around an island that they just visited, and then the next day, the inspiration is gone and they're in a very dark place. So there's emotion that drives that, right? So you can't always rely on emotion, which you have to from a creative standpoint. So anyone who can actually understand how to balance the commerce versus the creative and kind of be, 50% right brain, 50% left brain, I think that is the key to success in this industry. Now, to be a doctor or to be an attorney, I'm not sure that it's as ever changing, but I think, in the fashion industry, being able to change, that's the only thing you can do to be successful.
Jack, do you have any questions?
Yes. We've gotten a couple of student submitted or attendant submitted questions, and we can begin with Kaja, who is attending from Zagreb, Croatia, in the Sustainable Development Forum Green Window and Clinton Global Initiative. So her question is, how do we as young people change that in the traditional environments like Croatia and the region, working in the IT industry and having a lot of interests? I've been told many times that men will be scared by me and that my focus should not be on my career. My awards were followed by comments that, is it worth nothing if we do not know how to cook for my partner? Where do we find our voices and how do we speak up?
Mm-hmm.
Is that question for me? Or is it for?
It's for you, Tanya.
Okay. I'm like, okay. Oh boy, that is a question. I think, what I find so interesting about this is, again, I go back to Dr. Harris and hearing about what Margaret Thatcher had to endure. And we're sitting here on the phone with the former president of Croatia. I mean, women who are 100 billion% more successful than I am, who should be answering this question. But my point is that you're never going to, and whether you're in Croatia, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in New York, you will have those questions. And, I don't know. Is it great to be, listen, this is what I think. I think that being a woman, and I'm not ashamed to say it, yes, I go to work every day. I raise a 9-year-old daughter on my own. I have a lot of things going on. And if you have people to help you, whether it's a nanny, whether it's a babysitter, whether if you're lucky enough to have family, then that's great. If you want to cook your husband a meal, then cook your husband a meal. I personally love to cook. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed to say that, on the weekends, I love to cook. I love to do things, but you have to prioritize. And any man or person, woman, anyone that makes comments like that, I mean, I wouldn't even entertain comments like that. I would just go on, becoming successful, marching along to your own beliefs, marching along to your education, and really just being your best self. And it doesn't matter whether you like to cook or if you don't like to cook, or, if you want to get married, if you don't want to get married, if you want to have kids, if you don't want to have kids. None of that matters. It's what you believe as a strong person. And it doesn't mean that you can't do all of it if that's what you choose to do. So I get a little bit anxious when I hear questions like that, because it's just so narrow-minded. And I understand that we all have had these questions, but I would just smile and I would ignore the question and I would go about, educating yourself and being the best person that you can. And when you walk into a board meeting, like I have many times, and a man turns to you and says, "Oh, I take my coffee with milk," you sit down next to him and say, "Oh, that's nice. Why don't you ask the person who's actually getting the coffee, because I'm part of the board." So that's the type of thing that you can't let things like that. I mean, it's just a shame that questions like that or comments like that still happen.
Yeah, unfortunately. We have time for one more question, Jack.
Yeah, we definitely do. And it's actually for you. This is from Mateo, and they ask, Madam President, for your speech, can you give us an example from your presidential term, which concrete political move you made that has been shown by the media as sensationalism only because of your gender?
Oh, well, unfortunately, there are quite a few examples of that. And if you look at my photos in much of the media, you will see that they tend to focus on the feminine side. That the news, that whatever I did, the main news was always what I was wearing or kind of the hairstyle I had. So basically with any kind of discussion, any kind of state visit, it was mostly about the looks, and it was always trying to find something feminine in terms of, what was it that this woman said that defines her as not as competent as a man for the job. There is a lot of responsibility in the media for that still. We have media freedoms, but media responsibility, and certainly how media approaches gender is one of the issues that needs to be discussed further, because this information is dangerous, and taking different approach towards men and women is also something that we should certainly avoid. But finally, to close our discussion with Tanya, what advice would you give young people, in particular young women who want to make it in the business world today?
The best advice I would give is to, again, I feel like I'm just copying everyone, but just to work like you've never worked before, outwork everyone else. And what I mean by that is have passion about what you are interested in, because when you have passion, then your work ethic plays right into that naturally. And have conviction as well. Don't let comments like the question that was just asked, which is a totally valid question, by the way. Don't let those things rattle you. Use your confidence and use your EQ to sideline the people who, and there will always be people who will always try to step in front of you or try to knock you down. And a lot of the time it can be men, some of the time it can be women. And it's just staying mentally strong and sticking with that passion, and educate yourself, have great mentors, have people who will always tell you the truth. The people who like to talk, because they're opportunistic, are not the people you need in your life. Find a handful of people who will always tell you the truth so that you're self-aware, because the one thing that destroys everyone, in my opinion, whether it's in politics, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in banking, is ego. If your ego is out of control, you no longer have a sense of what is right and what is wrong, in my opinion. So remain self-aware, work hard, and have people around you that you can trust who will always say to you, hey, that's not right, or that is the right thing to do, and people that you can trust. And always hire people smarter than you and build great teams. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And to all of you watching us, one of the main points that I want for you to take away today from this webinar is to think about your own life experiences and how they can make you a better leader. Because we're all leaders in one capacity or another, in one way or another. And most importantly, leaders are not born. They're made through time, through personal growth, shaped by personal, environmental, and professional experiences. We often think of leaders as people possessing certain characteristics that we associate with leadership, such as intelligence, self-confidence, vision, eloquence, courage, charisma, etc. And yes, these are important characteristics. However, leaders are only human too. They're not always super confident. They have their weaknesses and moments of crisis and vulnerability. They harbor doubts. They change their minds more often than you would think. And they too experience uncertainty or unproductive constancy and complacency. Leadership isn't about success only. Before you get where you want to be, you have to learn to deal with all sorts of challenges. You will face a lot of transformational moments, transition, but also adversity, uncertainty, failures, recovery, and new beginnings. What I have learned from all of my experiences that it's not about how a certain chapter has ended. It is how you start writing a new one that matters. After all, my most recent political experience was not a successful one. I did not win the last election. And in moments like that, are there feelings of regret? Of course there are. Do you feel disappointed? Of course you do. But it is up to you how fast you will bounce back. Yes, it does hit you hard, but through the ups and the downs, or through the waiting rooms, all these experiences that make up your life, you have to develop resilience. After a period of introspection, it is time to start a new chapter. After all, you cannot hold on to what does not exist any longer. And if you keep reading the same pages over and over again, you will never finish the book. It is important not to start assigning blame to yourself or others. Learn from your mistakes as you do from those of others, but don't lose your self-esteem. Keep in perspective what is most important for you. My own experience has prompted me to reevaluate my goals and set a new course. But through all that, please remember to hold on to your values, even when you have to change your goals. And the most important one is respect. Respect yourself and show others that you respect them. And along with trust, respect is the most important currency in interpersonal relations. I would once again like to thank our guests for their contributions to this webinar, as well as my co-producers, Reed and Jack. And I invite you all to participate in our next seminar on the future of diplomacy, a global perspective, next Monday on the 29th of March at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 2100 hours GMT. Thank you very much.